Moves on in, and he scores! He's gonna learn today.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Pod Street Bullies. My name is Derek.
And I am John. What's going on, everybody?
We've got another week of mindless hockey talk because there really is no hockey going on.
Forget about hockey. There's nothing going on.
Is this getting old for you, though? Like, I mean, coming on the show, you know, because typically when the hockey's going on, there's plenty to talk about. And now it's like, man, we're scrounging.
Well, you know, the funny thing is it's like, even when the off season happens, like you can kind of dig into that off season well. You know, I find that with writing too. But we're hitting a point where it's like, okay, someone needs to do something. Like maybe one player can ride to another person's house and throw rocks at it just so we have something to talk about. Because like it's just sitting and waiting and not knowing what's going to happen.
Yeah, this episode or this show really is just us with a stick poking something that says NHL, you know, do something.
Right. Quit playing games with my heart. Quit playing games with my heart.
I'm going to have to restart this entire episode and we're not even 2 minutes in.
My heart.
Hope you're happy.
Hey, Mark. I should have known from the start. That's what he gets for making fun of me.
Help me, Mark. Help. Anyways, we do actually have some news to touch on, and it came out earlier today being Monday.
Let's touch it.
The American Hockey League, the league that John cares the least about, is shutting down operations this year. I shouldn't laugh about that. I'm just as sad as the next guy here about this because hockey is hockey, and this is kind of, in my opinion, a step in the direction of there being legitimately no hockey. Whether it be NHL, AHL, juniors, whatever may have you. I mean, did you see this coming?
Well, yeah, you know, and I mean, now that it's come out and the commissioner, whatever his title is of the AHL, stated the reason why, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. You know, the AHL couldn't play games with no fans.
Yeah.
You know, it's...
President and CEO Dave Andrews released a statement saying, you know, they reviewed this process, it was a lengthy review process. It's just not feasible, quote, not feasible in light of current conditions. So,
right. You
know, it makes complete sense. I get that.
Yeah, I mean, you look at a lot of these other leagues like the AHL, the Coast. I mean, even the junior leagues. It's more of you're going to these games based off of how close you are. You know, it's like a Friday night thing to do. There aren't as many people sitting down and watching these games on TV. Obviously, for accessibility reasons, you know, not everybody's going to go out and buy the AHL package. And I don't know what the local television situation's like for AHL teams or anything like that. But
I know the Phantoms have one with, I think it's Service Electric, but it's one of those things where it's like you got to have that channel on cable. I think it's only around that area.
Right. I mean, it could prove to be crippling for them. So, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. You know, I don't think that – I mean, I think that if you just want to jump to the gun, it would be like, oh, well, the NHL's next. I mean, it's a completely different circumstance. I do think that the NHL could survive playing not in front of people. But, I mean, a lot of dominoes are falling at this point.
Yeah, it's just a matter of time, I think. Personally, I really do think that the season would be canceled. I'm optimistic. I want it to happen, obviously, like the rest of us fans. But you look at it, and the AHL's made this move. You almost have to look at it and say, well, I have a hard time believing the NHL isn't going to follow suit with this. You know, and again, I could be completely wrong. I hope that I'm wrong here. But this move, to me, is indicative of a greater move being made at a higher level.
Yeah, you know, the thing is, and we talked a lot about this the last episode, so I really don't want to beat the dead horse here, but I just want to know what the NHL is actually doing. Because 1 second, it's like, we're going to make an announcement about the draft, and we're going to have the draft in early June, and it's going to be announced this week, and then that doesn't happen. and then it's still a stall game, and it's still a let's wait and see. I just want to know what is going on in their head. Are they going to do this draft in June? Are they going to do it in early June? Because if they need a month to prepare and they're not making any announcements, then early June is kind of out of the realm of possibilities. It's almost like they know something and they're just not saying anything. I'd rather them just dive this stake into our hearts and just get it over with instead of the hope of having hockey.
It's the Band-Aid. Just rip it, you know? I'd rather deal with that than the slow, you know. I have a hard time believing they're being as transparent as they possibly can be, although there is some level of transparency, you could argue. But at the same rate, you know, what we want is facts. What we want is this is what's going to happen, not, well, these are the possibilities. Like, we want to know what's going to happen.
And I just think at this point, you know, part of my French, I feel like it's getting to be shit or get off the pot time. You know, I understand that they can't make any rash decisions and there's so much up in the air, but I almost want to say if there's still so much up in the air at this point and there's still so much uncertainty, just call it. Just call it and hope that we can have almost a somewhat regular season next year.
I mean, let's be honest, too, and, you know, without getting into it too much, I've been watching the news. I've been watching these places that are opening back up. There are a lot of places that have opened back up that you're seeing another spike in cases.
Right.
So, you know, the risk, I feel like, far outweighs the reward of this season resuming. And even without fans, you got to take into account the people that are going to be working at the arena, because you need arena workers, some of them. You need the TV crew. You need coaches, the training staff, the players, obviously. There's a lot of people, and it's a lot of risk involved in putting these games on.
Right. I mean, and if they wanted to do something, now this is a ridiculous idea, but just go with me on this for a second.
Mm-hmm.
If they wanted to make something relevant and kind of prolong it a little bit, you know, they could kind of extend the draft if they really wanted to. It's 7 rounds. If they wanted to make like a thing out of it, like a whole week, you get at 7:00 every night for a week, you get a round. You know, I mean, just to give people something, you know, because at this point, like, there's nothing else going on. I mean, if they really wanted to say, hey, let's give the viewer something to watch, there you go.
I'd love to see the ratings and how it would go from how many people tuned into the first round to the 7th round, because I guarantee you it would look like a ski slope.
I bet you it would be steadier than what it is now, actually, because think about it now. I do, because think about it. You have Friday night, you have the first round.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you're going to have your most viewership then. But then you have a Saturday afternoon in June, rounds 2 through 7. I remember last year covering it, right? Mm-hmm. It was beautiful outside. I was in my basement. You know, you'd much rather be outside. And it's like bang, 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 bang. You don't even know what you're watching.
Oh, yeah.
So, although I don't think the viewership would be great come round 6 or 7, I bet you it would be steadier than the drastic drop it is from Friday to Saturday.
I still remember you going completely MIA on Sunday after draft day because you had been just busting your tail on these pieces. And I just, you told me too, you're like, listen, I'm going to do this. It's going to be great. And it was. Your draft coverage was phenomenal. But the very next day, I couldn't even get a hold of you. Like, if I had your wife's number, I'd have called her and been like, hey, is John dead? Like, where's he at?
Dude, I remember just writing that they drafted Bryce Brzezinski in the 7th round, and my hands were shaking. That's how much I had typed that weekend. I was just like, I just have a few more words. I think the article was like 104 words long just because I wanted to get it done with.
Oh, yeah.
Like, yeah, they did it. Woohoo!
This is Bryce Brzezinski, Mr. High School Hockey in Minnesota, and he's going to this college next year. Send.
So, yeah, all right. No AHL. I mean, to be honest with you, I thought maybe the season was canceled already. So,
yeah, it goes to show again how much John loves the AHL.
Well, but let's get something clear. I like the AHL
as a developmental league.
Well, yeah, because that's what it is.
Oh, but it's so entertaining though.
Yeah, but I don't put stock into wins and losses, is what I'm saying. Like,
I get that.
And I hate when people pull the Chuck Fletcher and sign a bunch of, career AHLers instead of signing Wyatt Wiley. Just saying.
Yeah. I'm with you
That's
on that.
that's where my argument is. I like the AHL for what it's supposed to be, but
are you going to have a guy like Wyatt Wiley learn how to, play in the pros from a guy like Reese Wilcox?
no.
Yeah, so you had to sign somebody.
Why?
So that Wyatt Wiley has somebody to look up to. I mean, they traded away T.J. Brennan.
Okay. It's
Just-
more about the progression of their game.
I'm waiting.
Like,
I'm waiting.
no, you're not right.
You
So-
can deny it all you want. You know I am.
I can't deny it. I'm a street rider. You don't want to.
The best part about this is that John has no clue, or he does know actually. I muted his mic, and you can't hear him singing.
What?
Oh, he's back. Yeah.
You muted me?
Oh, I muted you.
Dude, we're going to lose listenership.
Oh, I think we're going to gain listeners now.
We're losing it.
I'm making it a point to advertise this episode as the episode that Derek blocked John.
Oh, man.
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
like this.
Your fun is over.
All right. Should we move on to other things?
Let's move on to some other things. We've got one topic that we've literally been itching to discuss for, 3 weeks now?
We recorded an episode on it.
We did. We recorded an entire episode on this topic, and it was great. We had a great discussion about it. Come to find out that at the end of the episode, there was literally a 10-minute chunk right in the middle of the episode where my mic, again, pardon my French this time, shit the bed. So you can hear me, but it's a very loud, obnoxious feedback sound that just was not pretty, and there was no way we were putting that up. So, if everything goes according to plan this time, you will have that discussion this time around.
I hope it's as good as the last time, because the last time was really good, and I'm a little nervous that this one's not going to be as good.
Well, we're fresh this time, too. It's not like we're just, going through the motions like we would have if we re-recorded right away.
Yeah, but the first cut's the deepest, man.
Eh, don't do it.
First cut.
I saved you folks again.
Comes to loving me first.
I'm seriously tempted every time you sing to just mute your mic.
Yeah, but then it's going to be awkward silence throughout the whole show.
I could talk. I mean, there's no awkward
Nobody
silence here.
listens to this to hear you.
I don't know. Mark would beg
you're
to
right.
differ.
Your mom.
She doesn't
Your
even
mom.
listen.
She listens.
Who am I
Yeah,
kidding?
see.
Anyways,
All right, anyway.
we're going to get to this discussion here. We're going to talk about the best route to get to the NHL. We're going to talk NCAA versus CHL. So juniors versus college.
Yep.
What's the best route to get there?
So, yeah, I mean, keep in mind it's the best route in North America, right? We understand that, if you take the Europe path, especially if you're a European player, that's a whole different bag of beans that we're not going to get involved in. We're thinking strictly North America and its two most popular routes. So,
course.
like Derek mentioned, there is the Canadian Junior A route where you have the CHL, the WHL, the OHL, and the Q. And then there's the college route. And typically that involves either playing some sort of junior hockey, whether it be from the USHL or the AOJHL or those other junior leagues in Canada.
USNTDP as well.
That's what I was – yeah,
Yeah.
USNTDP.
That's what I'm
Thanks
here
for cutting
for.
me off and take the words right out of my mouth. I appreciate it.
Yep.
That's another song too. Right?
Kill me. But anyways, what we're going
Yeah.
to discuss here is key points. Advantages to one, disadvantages to that same one. Kind of not necessarily picking a side, but making the case and just saying these are the strong points behind choosing to go this route. These are the disadvantages to choosing to going that route as well. So let's start off here with a couple key points, or I say a couple. Let's start off with one. We'll start discussing here. What I wrote down and what I've got is that when you're going to college, as opposed to starting off in the Q, the OHL, WHL, I feel like that there's a lot more time for you to kind of physically mature, for you to really season your game and get it ready for that next step going either to the AHL or directly to the NHL. It provides more of an opportunity for you to become physically mature, and this kind of leads into a little bit of a stigma that I know you would love to discuss here as well, being more physically ready for the NHL game. So discuss this, because we've had this discussion before and you've made some really great points where we talk about, being more physically mature coming from this league compared to that league.
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that people like to kind of go to when they talk about development as far as why college is the better route is because they're playing against men, this dramatic thing that people like to say, putting up 39 points against men. It makes them sound like they're playing against these gladiators or these titans, and it's so much better for their game when, you know what, you're right. You're an 18-year-old, you're going up against a 21-year-old. Legally, that person is a man. But it's not like they're all specimens. And I do think that when you're looking for a more physical game, college is the route, but you're getting it later. You are getting it later on. You're 18, 19. By that point, you might have already had a season or two in the CHL. Mm-hmm. So I do think that it has its advantages, right? Mm-hmm. But you're getting it a little bit later. And I do think that one of the interesting things about college and its physicality is that you're playing a smaller amount of games. Mm-hmm. You're not playing the 60-something game season, 70-something game season. So although your typical 60 minutes might be a little bit more grueling, you're also not dealing with the wear and tear of a lengthier season.
So you could argue that it balances out where the physicality over a 35 to 40 game season is about the same in the NCAA as the physicality in 72, I believe, games in the leagues of the CHL.
Right. Now, but also an argument could be made that you're clumping in more games in a shorter amount of time.
True.
Because the college season is shorter. And, but I think that there's a stigma with college being this physical game and the the CHL being like this finesse game. And one of them makes you more NHL ready than the other. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that playing at college might make you more NHL ready immediately. Like, look at someone like Joel Farabee.
True.
But when you're looking about long-term progression and mastering your skill set, mm-hmm. I don't know if college has an upper hand there.
It's simple, easy, I should say, to look at the top scorers in the league right now, the top performers, whether it be forwards, skaters, goalies. 5 of the top 10 scorers in the league this year have come from a Canadian Junior League, whereas 1 of them came from college, and that one that came from college is 10th in the league, Jack Eichel. Your top 2 players, Draisaitl and McDavid, both came from the WHL and the OHL respectively. You've got guys like Nathan McKinnon, Brad Marchand, both from the Q, and then you've got Patrick Kane from the OHL. So you're right, where they're older, and they've been in the league longer. But again, you said guys like Joel Farabee, he's not playing those top line minutes like a Draisaitl, like a McDavid. He's not even really on that level, in my opinion. But
yeah. It is comparing apples to oranges at this point,
Yeah. Before we get too far down that rabbit hole.
Right. But, the thing is, someone is going to go and say, well, college hockey just increased its popularity. Like, it's hard to base, it's kind of hard to base your judgment off of the players that are in the league right now. Mm-hmm. But the way that I think of it is like college hockey is great for producing those bottom 6 guys.
Oh, absolutely.
Those reliable, they can come into the league at 20, 21, put up 30 points, if you need him to type deal. But it's like when it comes to the people who are going to be the true difference makers, I truly think that and I know we were saying we weren't going to pick a side here, but I do have a side here.
Mm-hmm.
I truly think that the CHL and that route does have an upper hand because you are playing against top talent. Look at some of these players. They're going up against other great players. You look at what the OHL is going to put in the first round of the draft this year. These guys are going up against each other every night. They have a longer season. Most of them are away from home, living with families they just met, whose job is to take in these kids. They get traded.
Mm-hmm. It's the NHL in junior format.
Right, and it's so much more, there's so much more to playing professional hockey than just skill. You need to have that mental toughness.
Yeah.
And if you get traded in the, Canadian juniors, you're going to have a little bit more practice for what might be down the road.
Yeah. I mean, Travis Konechny got traded from it was between Sarnia and Ottawa in his league when he was in juniors. So, I mean, that proves your mettle. It tests your mettle. The one thing I wanted to bring up, and
hey, Derek, I hate to cut you off, but I just don't want to leave that topic before I kind of tell this story, if that's okay.
Of course.
About being traded. So I just recently, a few weeks ago, talked to a member of the Flint Firebirds. His name is Riley Piercy.
Mm-hmm.
Little plug, yeah. Anyway, he had been traded from the Barrie Colts to Flint Firebirds midseason. And he was explaining to me kind of like what happened. So he got home, and when I say home, he was with a billet family.
Yep.
And found out he was traded. His billet mother was crying. His billet dad, is that what you call them? Billet dads? I don't.
It's basically like a hockey foster parent.
And his billet brother come home. They have one more dinner together. It's this immediacy. Like all of a sudden he's being drafted and taken from them. Drafted as far as like being sent to war, not like going to the professional. He's all of a sudden being ripped out of everything that he knew. And you have to remember that this is still a 16, 17-year-old kid.
Yeah.
And now he's got to get into a car, go across the border, go to a new country, a new family, a new team where he knows nothing, and get comfortable immediately because he's going to have to produce in a few days.
Ooh.
That's what he signed up for. But that's a level of preparation that you just can't get anywhere.
That's the type of burden that you see guys in the NHL crumble when presented with it. And I mean, these kids, like you said, 16, 17 years old, have to thrive, or else they fall by the wayside.
And I think that something like that increases your stock. I mean, when you look at him, he came into Flint and he had a better season once he was traded than when he was at Barrie. And, that shows you so many different things. I mean, but he was able to adjust. And being able to practice adjusting like that at that age, I think can go such a long way.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it really shows the fortitude of these kids, because when presented with a challenge like that, again, for I think the third time now, you're 16, 17 years old, and you're being told that you've got to leave the family that you've been living with that has been basically your support system for most of these kids. And now you're presented with the situation where you're living with another family that you don't know, whether you could have brothers or sisters, parent, whatever, and you've got an entirely new team that you've got to become accustomed to playing with. Like I'm 29. I couldn't imagine,
Right. Yeah. But so anyway, that was what I kind of wanted to touch on before we moved away from the whole being traded aspect.
Now, total sidebar, and you might laugh at this. I just got an update on my phone. Becky Lynch is pregnant.
Mm. Oh.
Yeah.
Like storyline?
Like
or
actually
pregnant.
Actually pregnant, from what I understand. She vacated the Raw Women's title. Do you want to know who the daddy is?
Well, I'd rather tell my wife first.
You ruined it. Anyway, so before we get way too sidetracked with that, so you've got your point across here. I want to get a point across, and I want to discuss it with you as well. This is something that I kind of feel passionate about in this argument. To me, the CHL, WHL, OHLQ, it seems more like a bet on yourself type of league where you're not going to college with a degree to fall back on. There are programs in place to help you get that degree, But like we've also discussed a few minutes back, you're the cream of the crop. You're coming from teams where you were the man in that league, and now you're in a league filled with kids just like you were in your previous position. So you're betting on yourself to outperform all those other guys that were in the same position you were a year or two ago. Whereas the NCAA, I think that, like you said, there's almost a little bit of a stigma around the NCAA where it's, you produce the bottom six guys. And we're seeing that more often because, in Farabee's role, technically he was a bottom six player. Wade Allison, Tanner Lashinsky are projected to be bottom six guys. Projected. But at the same rate, the CHL, you're seeing more and more high-end talent being churned out of there. And right now in the NHL, your top scorers, half of them came from that league. So you're essentially betting on yourself to be the guy amongst other the guys, if you want to call them that. Like, there's really no other better term to put on them. It's interesting to me, and it's a very interesting dynamic where you have so many players that are so similar and just brimming with talent, and then seeing the ones really rise to the occasion and kind of, for lack of a better term, grab that brass ring. It just feels to me like that league is more about betting on yourself than, I'm just going to go to the NCAA if I make a name for myself. Great,
Well, and it's interesting because if you look at it, most players, and with most I mean like 98% of the players that go to play in college have already been drafted if they're going to be drafted.
That's true.
Like they've been drafted, from the US and TDP or the other junior leagues, but they already know that they are a part of an organization. They might not be signed; they're not going to be signed yet, but they already know that they've been drafted. Mm-hmm. Now you have like the college free agents; it's a whole different ball game. But part of what you're doing in your Canadian juniors, right, is you're playing to get drafted. That's still part of the goal, which is an interesting dynamic because it's completely different. You look at guys like Joel Farabee, he was a part of the Flyers before he ever took the ice for Boston University.
Absolutely.
And that's not that you've typically played 2 seasons in the OHL or the Dub or the Q before you're drafted. But the one thing that I do want to say, though, in regards to the education aspect, every player in the CHL is a part of the CHL scholarship program. So they do have that to fall back on as well. It's just not as obvious in college, right? I mean, not as obvious as college. So you would play your whole OHL career when you're 21 if you made it through an overage year. If there was no pro signing, you could then go play at university and also get your degree.
Now, I don't know if you would know this or not, but if you play in the CHL, you go to a university, I'm assuming you can still play for that university, correct?
Yeah,
okay.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, the goaltender for Flint is doing that. I can't remember the Canadian college he's going to, but yeah, typically that's what happens. They commit and then they go play there.
Okay.
I mean, and at that point, there's always that glimmer of hope that one day you'll make a pro team, but you start thinking about other options at that point because you weren't drafted, you haven't been signed to a contract. The writing starts to be on the wall a little bit more.
Now, does that then kind of lessen the case for the NCAA? Because to some of these CHL players, they could view the NCAA kind of as like a last-ditch resort where, if I don't make a name for myself playing in the junior leagues, I might be able to make a name for myself playing in the NCAA. Possibly.
I mean, there's so many teams in the various CHL leagues that I'm not really sure that they would, but yes, they could change their mind and go to a college.
Okay. Well, I'm saying like as just kind of in a player's mind, like if you're playing for Flint right now and there's no prospect of signing a contract, are you viewing the NCAA as your last-ditch effort and kind of like a last resort in order to make it to the NHL?
So here's one thing that I'm not sure on, but I think, and someone please point it out if I'm wrong, but I think that the scholarship program only works towards Canadian University.
Okay. All right. That would make sense.
I think. Yeah, don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that it only works towards Canadian University.
It gets a little murky when you're talking about teams like Seattle, in the WHL, but at the same rate, it would make sense because a majority of these teams are in Canada.
Right. But the interesting part is most of college players also have been drafted by a CHL team.
Yeah.
So, little quick sidebar. Right, it's the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds in the OHL. They own the rights to Cole Caulfield and John Beecher.
Oh, goodness.
And there's been conversation that if there's uncertainty that college hockey won't happen next year, some of these college players will go, you know what, we're worried about our development. We're going to go play in the CHL if it's up and operating. Yeah. So could you imagine Sault Ste. Marie all of a sudden gets Cole Caulfield and John Beecher?
Oh, boy. Oh, boy.
It'll be interesting to see because, I mean, a lot of young players, if the CHL isn't working and they're like, and especially if teams decide they want to sign them, say Montreal is like, no, Caulfield, you can't just work out at home. We're going to sign you to your entry-level contract and then send you to the Sioux.
Yeah.
So that'll be an interesting dynamic. I mean, I know that's a little bit of a sidebar.
Yeah.
But go ahead. What
now,
were you say?
It's another discussion. If you have more to add to that last discussion, then
No. Go for it.
Perfect. So
go for it.
We're going to talk about a point that you brought up, I guess, a few minutes ago. We talked about guys who are just dominating their leagues in the CHL. You have guys that do that consistently, where you're averaging 2, sometimes in some extreme cases, 3 points a game. What happens when you have a guy, much like Dylan Strome, much like Morgan Frost, where they are just completely dominating and just outperforming everybody in the league, but either A, they're not ready to make the jump, or B, there's no room on the NHL team because they can't play in the AHL.
Right.
So what happens then? What do they learn from another year playing against inferior competition in, the Dub, the Q, or the OHL? Is it more advantageous to take that risk and let them play in the NHL, or do you just say, hey, kind of, do your thing in juniors for a year, and we'll see how you're doing next year?
So I think it truthfully depends on the player. Now I'm going to give you a few examples.
Okay.
Now let's start with someone who is Flyer centric, Morgan Frost.
Of course.
Okay. Played for the Sioux, lit it up.
Absolutely.
2 years in a row. One would argue that his last year at Sault Ste. Marie wasn't good for his development because he was already just tearing that league apart.
Oh, yeah.
However, how many people have had one-and-done careers at the pro level where it's just like they've shown signs of greatness, and then all of a sudden they sign that big contract, and they're like Kyle Alcaposo or whatever his name is. You know what I mean? But
yep.
So when you reach that elite level, you then have to work at maintaining it. There's also a level of pressure there. Everybody's watching you to make sure that you're maintaining it. If you don't produce 2 points a game, people are going to be breathing down your neck.
Oh, yeah.
That's a level of pressure that builds mental toughness. And NHL teams want players that when they get to the top are going to continue to push themselves and see how much further they can get. They're not going to be looking for people who are complacent.
Oh, yeah.
And I truly think that depending on the player, there is still a level of pushing yourself when it comes to that. Now I'm going to give you another example. Quentin Byfield is about to be drafted in the NHL draft, probably going to go second overall.
Yep.
Quentin Byfield is a big mother trucker, and he physically dominates on the ice to the point where he's just like, get out of the way, kid. Yeah, like, you know, the argument could be made that the OHL isn't good for his continued development because of the physical presence that he is on the ice, that he can just bully through everybody, that it's like a senior in high school playing with a bunch of sixth graders.
Mm-hmm.
So for someone like him, the argument could be made, and I kind of agree with it, that it's maybe he should go over to Europe and develop his game in Europe and play with pros or against men. You know, where that might be better for his development. But someone in Morgan Frost's case, I don't think that physicality, right, was the thing. It wasn't like he was mauling guys.
No.
So
we all know he's a finesse type of guy.
Exactly. So for those finesse players, I really don't see an issue with it. Now, I think it's a bigger conversation where maybe you should be allowed to join an AHL team a year. But I also understand what that does for the junior leagues, right? That depletes the talent. So, I mean, that's an interesting conversation that maybe we can get into another day because it is complicated. But I do think that depending on the player, it's not necessarily a bad thing if you're tearing it up. Like Marco Rossi. I think Marco Rossi, who scored 120 points this year, should still be in the OHL next year, and let's see if he can do it again.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You know, he had 120 this year. I want him to have 130 next year. You know,
there needs to be goals. You know, there needs to be something for those guys to go after because that shows a potential. You know, the team that drafts this guy, Marco Rossi,
right?
That shows them, okay, the ambition's there. The guy wants it. The guy really is pining to get better and better each year. It shows the determination and the mental toughness.
Right. Now, to be fair, though, if Marco Rossi next year plays in the OHL and has 108 points instead of 120, I don't think anybody's going to be like, oh, well,
he had 120 last year.
He's regressing.
Like, yeah, okay, pal.
Yeah. You know, but you do bring up a good point, though. I mean, there is that argument. But also, you know, hockey is such a team game, and it's such a – they're comrades, right? They bond. There's this level of I'm going to go to bat for you, and a lot of players at the college level, I feel like it's harder to kind of create that team mentality long term. You know, when you're in the CHL, you're going to be with this team for 3-4 years, most likely, unless you're Connor McDavid or somebody fantastic.
Yeah.
In college, though, you're just looking at this as a next step. Most like first round picks, like Joel Farabee, looked at Boston University as a pit stop on his way to the NHL.
Oh, absolutely.
I find it very hard to believe that he grew emotionally attached to that team. It was just about playing his game to get him to the next level. So I do wonder if a bit of that team aspect is lost in college, and some people might tear me to shreds, and I don't know. I never played anywhere near that level of hockey. You know, I couldn't tell you, but I'm just guessing that it's harder to kind of develop that bond and that idea of a team with some team that you're just like, well, once my NHL team signs me, like that's the goal.
Yeah, it's simple mathematics when you break it down to its simplest form. 1 year is not going to be nearly as effective as spending 3 or 4 years together with the same people.
Right.
Yeah. So another argument, and we've touched on this real quick, I figured we'd dig a little bit deeper into this, the schedules. We can compare schedules here. So the NCAA, obviously, we've got around 40 games, if you want to include playoffs, Frozen Four, and all that. CHL, you've got a 72-game schedule, and then you've got playoffs, the Memorial Cup. Some of these teams have the opportunity to play upwards of 80 to 90 games per year.
Yep.
Does that give the edge to we talked about, I guess, the physicality aspect as well, but I kind of want to dig a little bit deeper into just the schedule aspect of it. Does it give the edge to one league over the other, having, the amount of games the CHL plays compared to the amount of games that the NCAA plays?
Well, I view it like this. If you're taking up an apprenticeship with something, right? You're going to be a carpenter or whatever.
Okay.
You want to be put into a position where you're experiencing almost close to what you're going to be experiencing when you become a master carpenter or a professional. You're no longer an apprentice. I would imagine the same thing if you're a young player playing in a developmental league. You're going to be want to put in a position where you are as close to emulating what you'll be doing in the future. So if you're playing a longer season and you're playing 7-game series, I feel like that can only benefit you. I mean, I don't know. I don't think that the college schedule is necessarily a disadvantage to anybody, but I do think that there is an advantage to playing a 70-something game season and then going to the playoffs, and most likely you're making the playoffs. I mean, in the OHL, 4 teams don't make the playoffs, which is 4 out of the 20 don't make the playoffs, which is a conversation for probably a different podcast. But
yeah, you have an 80% chance of making the playoffs.
Right. But I do think that there's a benefit to that. There's the wear and tear.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I don't know what else to say. I do think that there's a benefit to it.
Yeah, and I mean, again, like you've said, you can argue that the NCAA is a little more physical compared to the OHL, WQ. But at the same rate, when you're playing 70-something games and you're playing basically every other night, if not back-to-backs, even in the AHL, you see a lot of these teams are playing back-to-back-to-back. You're playing Friday, Saturday, Sunday. That takes a toll on your body, and you're suiting up every single night. Like, okay, this guy just checked me into the boards, and I've never been hit harder in my entire life, but hey, I got to suit up tomorrow because if I don't, someone else takes my spot. Right. So there's the gruelingness and the difficulty of the schedule, I think, weighs maybe heavier for me than it should, but at the same rate, you can never discount, the frequency of the games, where like in the NCAA, again, I'm not very well versed in the NCAA, but I feel like when you're playing twice the amount of games in a little bit more and a little bit longer period of time, you're still playing a lot more, and frequently, to me it seems.
Yeah, and I think to kind of tie a bow on this, if you look at it, both these leagues are very good for development. I don't want to go and say that one route is better than the other because it really depends on the player, right?
Oh, for sure.
But I do think that there are certain advantages to each one. When it comes to the NCAA, I think that the NCAA is better at producing NHL players more immedately because They're getting them when they're older already. Think about it. They're 18, 19. They've already would have spent 2-3 years in the CHL.
Yep.
There is that more physical game, that playing against men thing. So I do think that it makes them more NHL ready from a physical standpoint, where they can maybe surpass the AHL and start playing at the NHL at a bottom 6 role. However, I think that when it comes to long-term effectiveness at the professional level, the CHL has the upper hand.
Yeah.
Because when you're looking at a lot of these guys, and again, I'm discounting, the top 10 picks that go maybe spend one more year in the CHL and then go to the pros or go to the pros immediately. You're looking at these people that are progressively getting better every year, and they're increasing their points, and they're going from one style of play at the CHL to then they're going to the AHL for a year, and they're learning how to play there, and they're producing and mastering their game there. And they're just, although it takes them maybe a little bit longer, I think that they produce more consistently productive players at the NHL level.
Yeah.
Long term, again. And I would be curious if we had this conversation 5 years from now to look at how many top 6 players come from each developmental league.
It would be really interesting to have the time to break that down, get the top 6 from each team, figure out where they all came from, and just break it down, say X amount of players came from here, X amount of players came from there. It would be interesting because, I mean, again, you got to discount too, the top 6 from the best team in the league aren't necessarily going to match up with the top 6 from the bottom team in the league, but at the same rate, you're still playing top minutes on an NHL team.
Well, and you look at a guy like Joel Farabee, and I guess I want to make this clear. I don't think that Joel Farabee is a bottom 6 talent. I think that Joel Farabee should be is a future top 6 forward in this league. However, I do think that you do run the risk of plateauing. I mean, I've said this before. You do run the risk of plateauing when you're put into a role that you're better than.
You're right.
So I wonder how many people in college go from college to the NHL level, get put into that either third or fourth line role, and then just get stuck there because it's kind of just what they're now learning and developing into becoming.
Yeah.
I mean, if he's learning the roles and responsibilities of a bottom 6 guy, does that then stunt his ability to take his game to the next level?
It pigeonholes his skill set.
Maybe.
Potentially,
I mean, this is all hypothetical and potential, but it would be interesting to see if down the road, if he only ends up being, a third line winger.
Yeah. I mean, I'd rather take my chances with a coach like Vigneault than a guy like Hackstall. Imagine how
there's
Hackstall
so many
would have
other
managed him.
Factors. It's just using the Flyers guy as an example because we are a Flyers podcast.
Of course, yes. But with the Bow being on this episode, we've kind of come to the conclusion here. And John, I'm going to let you go first. The better league, if you had to choose, the better route, I should say, to get to the NHL, what would you choose?
I still have to go CHL, man. I think that the college game has really come a long way, and I think that it's in the best position it's ever been. I mean, after this whole pandemic thing, but I think that when it comes down to it, just the CHL as a whole produces more of a league that's closer to what kids are going to be playing later on in life. So until I start seeing your top 5 players coming from college, I'm going to stick with the CHL, man.
I'm with you. I completely agree. We had, the numbers don't lie. You've got 5 of the top 10 players in the league right now, scoring wise, that came from the CHL, whereas 1 came from the NCAA. Right now, like you said, down the road, if we have this conversation in 5 years, it could be completely different, and we could be talking about how the NCAA has improved leaps and bounds, and that the best players in the league are now coming from college. But for now, even the goalies, 4 of the best, statistically speaking, have come from the CHL. So I'm
right. I hate to untie the bow really quick, but just real quick, I just want to say there's certain things too where it's like you look at a guy like Jack Hughes, who was committed to go to college and never went to college.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
He just ended. So like he then gets eliminated from the picture. If he turns into a top player, he's not a Canadian junior or a college player.
And then you've got guys that, played and were drafted out of, SHL, KHL, but then spent a season in the CHL, spent a season in college. Like it's a gray area, if you want to call it that.
We were just desperate for something to talk about.
Yeah, and we figured this was interesting enough that it would hold your attention. But
Right.
again, now we're placing the bow on this. So with that bow being placed, John, please let everybody know that's listening right now where they can find us on all of the podcasting platforms.
So first, you can find us on Twitter at PodSTBullies, and you can find us on your various podcasting platform listening device things. You've got Apple Podcasts. See there? I called it Apple Podcasts.
There you go.
I did.
I'm so proud.
I still want to call it iTunes, but
I do too.
You can find us on Spotify. You can find us on Stitcher. You can find us on Spreaker. You can find us iHeartRadio, Google playlists,
Google
podcasts.
It's close enough.
And my favorite, Podmuncher. You can still find us there for now.
They have any deals going on right now?
It's just the same thing, man.
Same thing. What is that?
Yeah.
You don't have to enter your age, you know.
Yeah, no age. Yeah, this is me just not having another creative thing to add to that.
Yeah, this is what this layoff has done to us.
Yeah.
But regardless, folks, you can find me on Twitter at PodStreetBob. You can find John on Twitter at PodStreetGove. That makes us the Pod Street Bullies, and I'm going to leave you, as I always do. Let's go Flyers.
Bye now.